Johnson. It's the first time the paper's GOP-leaning editorial board has not endorsed the Republican candidate for president since the paper's founding in the 1870s. We're going to talk about that in our roundtable discussion with some folks who know newspapers and political endorsements very well. So let's get to it. On this Sunday morning, it's Flashpoint. Thank you for being with us. Lots to talk about on this Sunday morning, so let's jump right in. Joining me at the round table is Metro Times columnist and head of the journalism faculty at Wayne State University, Jack Lessenberry. We also have Nancy Kaffer. She is the columnist at the Detroit Free Press. We've got Bankolay Thompson. He's the former editor of the Michigan Chronicle and now a contributing columnist at the Detroit News. And of course, Nolan Finley, the editorial page director at the Detroit News, which made a lot of news this week, which we will get to. That big historic endorsement this past week backing Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson. Before we get to his latest cringe-worthy moment, let's talk just a little bit about endorsements and let folks know what goes into endorsing a candidate, a political candidate. Do you guys sit in a room? Do you do rock, paper, scissors? Do you raise your hand and vote? How does it go? Nolan, you want to start?
Well, it's a process. I mean, we try to get the candidates to come in. In this case, we did get a good deal of time with Gary Johnson. We weigh our values against the candidates' values, our positions against theirs. We weigh their character and our comfortableness with how they would govern and who they would be as president. And it all goes into that. We talk it out and try to come to a consensus.
How does it work over at your paper?
Pretty much the same way. You know, it's a lot of times it's pretty apparent, but there is all this due diligence that we do. This year we did something a little different with our state legislative endorsements. We, because we believe that the Republican majority in Lansing has just done a terrible job, we endorsed specifically in what we thought were certain potentially swing legislative districts, and so we endorsed all Democrats in those races because we felt like there's a potential to build a Democratic majority that might be able to be a little more productive than the current Republican majority. So that was a specific target we had in mind there. So we used our endorsement power toward a specific goal there. Of course, we did have to make sure all of the candidates were credible, reasonable people. We weren't going to go solo to get to our goal here. But yeah, it's sometimes Nolan makes it sound very rational. In my experience, sometimes there's a lot of like screaming at each other and some real arguing about to get to where you need to go.
Bankolay, in your experience, you've worked at a few papers over your career. How's it been? Is it pretty much like Nolan described?
It's pretty much the same. You know, you bring in the candidates, you interview them and see what their position is vis-a-vis what your institutional position is. And I think it's also important to know that endorsement actually it's expressing the institutional value and philosophy of the paper itself, as a paper. And I think some endorsements do not necessarily reflect, the newsroom coverage of news, and it does not reflect, there's a demarcation between the editorial board and of course the newsroom. So the endorsement of a candidate doesn't necessarily change how a newsroom will cover that particular candidate itself.
Sure.
It's an institutional position. The paper saying, okay, here is who we believe, represents the institutional position and value of the paper.
Jack?
Well, sure, I've been on a number of editorial boards and I'm still an advisor to one in Toledo, Ohio. It depends on the newspaper. In fact, if it's a family-owned newspaper, whoever owns it usually has sort of a final say. But one thing I should mention, I think, is that endorsements are often more important in lesser-known cases. I don't think a lot of people decide from the newspaper who's going to vote, they're going to vote for president, but they often do for a circuit judge because they don't know these people. And I've seen people cut the news and free press endorsements out and take them into the voting booth.
Sure. So how influential, though, would you say the local newspaper is for endorsing in terms of voters? Does it matter, especially to millennials? And Jack, you can talk a little bit about this since you're over at Wayne State. You deal with a lot of millennials. Does it matter to them?
Well, millennials don't read the newspaper a lot. This is the problem. They read their phones. And there's a big presumption about millennials. And the question is, are they going to vote? And if they do, are they going to vote dramatically one way or another?
I just want to know that you can actually get the newspaper on your phone.
Yes,
right.
That's very true.
Right, but sadly, I don't even see my journalism students reading it on their phone unless I bludgeon them into doing it.
Yeah.
So,
I think the social media is also angle. Let me double down on that. I do post my columns on Facebook, on Twitter, and so forth. So I mean, there are millennials who are reading, what is happening on the phone. But again, I'm not sure if. you know, newspaper endorsements again are just institutional position. You know, sometimes it may not carry the weight that we expect, because you know we've had cases where newspapers have endorsed certain candidates, and those those candidates went on to lose, and the other candidate won. So,
but they are more influential when they take an unexpected position. When the News endorsed Romney and the Free Press endorsed Obama 4 years ago, no one was surprised. This one was a big surprise.
So talk about that, Nolan. A big surprise indeed, and you've caught a lot of flack for that.
Yeah, you know, and a lot of support. Yeah, I mean, this was a surprise to us as well. But, you know, normally we're a conservative newspaper. We tend to fall along the lines of the Republican Party. But the Republican Party and its nominee this year it's not something we recognize. And we looked at Donald Trump. But, you know, we've been saying from the beginning of the year, we wouldn't endorse Donald Trump. We've been in the never Trump camp for almost a year now, almost since the time he got in. And you know, Republicans decided, the Republican primary voters decided, we're going to throw the establishment out the window, and we're going to get a real fire breather, you know, red meat guy as our nominee, because we've lost past elections because the establishment chose the nominee. And so now they have Trump, and let's see, and the establishment's gone. Let's see what they do with him.
What do you think about that, Nancy?
About Nolan's endorsement?
Yeah, the endorsement.
I think Nolan's endorsement actually probably is one of those presidential endorsements that has the ability to move the needle. I think, as he says, there's a lot of Republicans who are frustrated with their nominee. And I think a paper as respected in conservative circles as the News saying, here's a credible alternative, can have a much broader impact than in a typical year, as Jack said.
In a sense,
Obama,
I would say
Romney.
something to make Nolan mad. But essentially, this really was an endorsement of Hillary Clinton. If you read this editorial, it says that we don't agree with Clinton. She's got character issues, but she has the temperament and the background. And Trump may actually be dangerous, which I certainly subscribe to. I wonder whether possibly it was easier to endorse a libertarian than alienate, you know, traditional news readers by endorsing
and I would take issue with it. This was an endorsement of Gary Johnson, because we felt he was the candidate in the race that shared our values most closely. And when we interviewed him, we found him a person of depth and intellect. We were perfectly comfortable with him. Chicago Tribune did the same thing today. We could not put our newspaper's name behind Hillary Clinton.
Nolan, what do you say to the people who say that a vote for this Libertarian candidate is a vote for Donald Trump?
That's not... it's not our business to run those calculations. We're not sitting at a racetrack going through a race card trying to pick winners. We endorse the people, you know, it's a conscience vote, and we went with our conscience.
Go ahead.
Let me say that, you know, I want to admit that Nolan has given me great pains, because I think on Thursday morning I started getting Facebook messages, and I said, you know, talk to Nolan Finley directly. But, you know, on the question of Trump, here, you know, I was walking up here and I realized, I was checking, I've written in my columns in the news, I've written about 8 columns about Trump. All of it mostly, you know, basically talking about just the things that he represents, which are totally out of sync with the realities of America today. I think there's an across-the-board realization, not only with what the news did, but, I mean, USA Today came out. It's never endorsed a presidential candidate, basically said, do not vote for Trump. So I think what we are seeing across the nation, there's an across-the-board consensus that, you know, notwithstanding who Hillary Clinton is, she'll have trust issues, but Trump is not an option to be president.
It has nothing to do with policy, I don't think. I mean, you can say that Barry Goldwater or George McGovern are way out there, but the case that this person is unlike anyone that's ever run for president before, and that you question whether they have the gravitas at all.
But it's policy, too. It's policies. True. Have nothing to do with conservative values or
you can tell what his policies are.
Any consistent guiding principle. And that was one of the things we mentioned. That was one of our big problems with him. You know, he doesn't stand for anything.
I think part of the problem, though, is that his followers are so opposed to anything that has, you know, traditional sources of authority or anything official that, as you said, there's this consensus lining up that Trump is a danger to the country and can't be elected. And I'm pretty sure that just causes the people who support him to dig in deeper. That's why they like him. Okay, we've got to take a break. We'll have more from a roundtable discussion right after this. Welcome back, everybody. In case you missed it last week, Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson appeared on MSNBC's Hardball, and it has a lot of people talking what he said or maybe what he didn't say. Take a listen here.
Anybody in the world you like, anybody, pick any leader.
The former president of Mexico.
Which one?
I'm having a brain.
Well, name anybody.
He could not name a world leader that he looked up to, and that has a lot of people talking. This is a candidate for president. Nolan, this came out the day after, I believe, the newspaper endorsed Gary Johnson.
We didn't handle the question very well. The right answer was, this is not an era of great world leadership. I can't look around the world and say, there's a world leader I really admire. Now, he bumbled all over himself, which is sort of his tendency in that he's in that environment. He's not the most polished guy. He's not the quickest guy on his feet, but we interviewed him in depth about foreign policy, and we're very comfortable about his grasp of the issues. He simply should have said, and as he probably knows today, and as he's tweeted out, there are no foreign leaders I admire in the world today.
We should point out this isn't the first time. He also had another snafu with Aleppo. He was asked about Aleppo.
Which was different. He certainly should have been prepared to answer that question in more in depth. Again, you know, when he was in our office, he exhibited a wide knowledge of the Middle East. But in this case, if there's no leader you admire, you should have just said, I don't admire anyone.
Nancy, your thoughts?
So these are sort of embarrassing moments for Gary Johnson, and I would argue someone who bumbles all over themselves shouldn't be the president. But I think that the stuff he can't remember is scary. The stuff he can remember and proposes to do if he became president is worse. Wants to privatize Medicare and Medicaid, wants to eliminate the minimum wage, believes that climate change is happening and that man-made factors have contributed to it, but that we can't afford to do anything about it. So frankly, like I said, the stuff that he can remember is more terrifying to me than the stuff he
all the reasons we endorsed him, by the way.
You know, there's something we forget all the time. We say that Trump would do this, or Johnson would do that, or Clinton would do this. They can't do it on their own. This isn't they're not going to be Putin. There's something called Congress. And if Johnson got to be president, there's exactly 0 Libertarian members of Congress, so he's going to have to work with one or both of the two
Which
parties.
may end the gridlock, because you know the Republicans aren't going to work with Clinton, and the Democrats aren't going to work with Trump, if anybody does. Maybe this is a guy who could finally break through the gridlock we've been living with for 2 administrations.
He's not going to get elected, so we're not going to find out. But I think that there's plenty
everybody starts with 0 votes on election day. Enough people get up and vote for him, he's got the same chance as anyone.
Was there a lot of panic that morning when he made this snafu at the newspaper?
None, because we watched that, and did he give the right answer? No, but you know, we would have given the same answer. There are nobody we admire.
But look, I think we can make the bet. Gary Johnson is not going to be the commander-in-chief on November 8th. He will not be inaugurated in January 2017. It's going to be either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. I think that's where things are right now. And I think it's important to note that, you know, we just talked about it in the break, that Donald Trump has yet to receive any kind of newspaper endorsement, and I'm waiting to see.
He had the National Enquirer.
The National.
And the Santa Barbara News Press.
What about the Weekly World News?
So that actually, that explains what the Trump campaign is. But you know, I think it's serious. I think it's serious. I think, you know, looking at the Republican coalition, we saw an unusual number of Republicans coming around Hillary Clinton. I think Hillary Clinton has more propensity to work with Republicans than Donald Trump. I mean, because even the Republicans cannot rein in Donald Trump. I mean, they've advised him, don't do this, and he goes the other way. He believes that perhaps, you know, his most currency is being a contrarian.
Yeah, I don't think we had a poll out, Channel 4 and us, this past week. I don't see a whole lot of Republicans yet going to Hillary Clinton. They're sitting there not knowing what to do, which is one of the reasons we endorsed the way we did, to give them a place to go.
And you're not backing off that endorsement at all after what happened. Your idea is just that he doesn't do well on pop quizzes.
If campaign flubs cause newspapers to reverse their endorsements, we'd be reversing them every week for every candidate.
Nolan, what's going to happen to your beloved Republican Party after this election?
I'm not a Republican. I'm a conservative.
I said, well,
there's a difference.
The Republican Party is going to have to make a decision. They either choose to rebuild and sort of cut off this rump wing that has been, you know, guiding them in an untenable direction, or they dissolve. But it wouldn't be the first time in our country's history that a political party has dissolved when it became irrelevant and another party emerged.
It's been 150 years, but
well, we've got a long time ahead of us. Things don't have to stay the way they are today in the political environment, and I suspect they won't.
And that's assuming he loses. If he doesn't, I think we're all in deep, deep trouble.
Well, if not this year, 4 years from now.
So. All right. Go ahead.
I want to say that, you know, these are historic times, and I think, you know, it requires leadership, and that's why you see this unusual support, unusual endorsements of Hillary Clinton as opposed to Donald Trump. There are newspapers who are laying their reputation on the line, their historic centuries-old reputation, to say this is what we believe, and that Donald Trump should not get to 600 Pennsylvania Avenue, even though he indicated in the debate that his hotel, even if he doesn't win, he'll still be on Pennsylvania Avenue. But I think people understand the seriousness of these times, and that's why you have, you know, the Arizona Republic and other papers. Unusual, you had the Harvard Republican Club, in, you know, over more than a century, have never really supported, you know, Hillary Clinton. They came out against Donald Trump.
But Bankole, when you have all these endorsements for Clinton and Trump with all these problems, why is he so close in the polls? Why is he only 3-4 points behind Hillary Clinton?
Well, same answer, Hillary Clinton. And she can't pull away. I mean, any other Democrat would be beating this guy by 20 points. But that trust factor, that disconnect between her and the American people, the baggage she brings in, you could pick almost any Democrat would be up 20 points on this guy.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. We do have to leave it right there. We got to go to break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The Mike Morse Law Firm has been...
Welcome back, everybody. Our roundtable discussion continues. What do flooded freeways tell us about our aging infrastructure? We have seen a mess this past week with all the rain. The lodge was flooded. We had a video of one car completely submerged underwater. Why does this keep happening? What can we do? Nolan, your thoughts?
Well, as bad as it was, it's better than it once was. As freeways are being rebuilt, the state is putting in larger drain pipes and better pumps, but we've still got a lot of old infrastructure that has been neglected almost since the time it was built. And you know, that's why we continue to have these problems. Over the years, we've shortchanged our investment, and not only in our freeways and roads, but also our water lines. You know, that's why we're seeing things like was what happening in Flint and other places. Our sewer lines, I mean, we should have separated our sewers decades ago, our sewage and wastewater lines. We just haven't invested.
But when you say it's better than, you know, a few years ago, say that to the person that has sewage in their base.
Well, of course, but and that's a whole nother matter. I mean, that's municipal issues in terms of separation. But on the freeways themselves, they are moving to address the problem.
Nancy.
So, you know, we've been sold this bill of goods by a particular political party that all taxes are bad, that government spending is always wasteful. And when you cut tax revenues, the way that we've seen, we had a massive tax cut for businesses and the shifting of that tax burden onto individuals, it doesn't result in as much money to invest in the infrastructure that we have, that we need. We have to take care of this stuff. It's sort of a baseline we should be hitting, is to invest in our infrastructure.
Snyder invested more money in infrastructure by far than Granholm did in her 8 years. This has been a bipartisan neglect going back 50 years.
The late Mayor Daley, the first mayor of Chicago, once said, you don't get no political credit for stuff you spend below the street. And that's what happens, and we don't do that. And you know, you don't get a big ribbon cutting opportunity for a new sewer pipe. And so we're letting our infrastructure fall apart.
Well,
and you know, it's even worse. And then when it becomes personal or we have a catastrophe, that's when, you know, you see politicians jumping around and wanting to offer a plan, unless it, you know, something catastrophic happens. So we're always reacting instead of being proactive.
Yeah. So go ahead.
And we have the roads deal that we did in the GOP-led House is a terrible plan that's going to result in massive general fund cuts. You know, we have this. When we come up with plans to fix this kind of stuff, a lot of times they don't do what we need them to. They're sort of a Band-Aid so we can feel like we did something, but aren't going to get the job done.
And when you say it's better, I wasn't here in 2014. I hear about the big flood of 2014, but still, we've done so many stories just in the time that I've been here. And it's the same thing, but apparently it's better?
When you have the sort of massive rainfalls you're never going to be able to move all that water. Better infrastructure surely could have helped, but you have a 4 or 5 inch rainfall within a few hours, you're going to get flooded basements.
And some of this is climate change. Climate change, this is a byproduct of it. We're going to see more weather extremes. All the scientists tell me that.
But not everyone believes in climate change.
Right.
And
well, not everybody believes in the tooth fairy either, but this is a situation where there is no reasonable people who do not believe in climate change.
When we're having 100-year storms every other year,
yeah.
And once you have it becomes a political agenda. Politicians are driving it, then it becomes difficult. You know, there's a saying I remember very well that politicians always promise to build bridges where there's really no river. So.
Well, and we got one dude running for president who has said that he believes climate change is a Chinese hoax. So.
Wonder who that is.
Make America great again.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, we have to leave it there. We appreciate you guys joining us, and we thank everybody for that. Before we say goodbye, though, Devin Skillion sat down with Ford Executive Chairman Bill Ford Jr. at the World Mobility Leadership Conference earlier this week, and they talked about how we'll all be getting around in the future and Donald Trump's remarks about Ford Motor Company during the first presidential debate. Listen in here.
We're about as American as you can get, and the USA is our home, and we are the largest maker of cars and trucks in the USA, more than any of our competitors. So, and we've been investing like mad in the US. We've added 26,000 jobs in the US. And you know, I went and saw Donald Trump about 6 weeks ago and had a meeting with him, and he knows all this.
It just plays well. Then is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm not sure. It may play well with some people, but the facts are the facts, and the facts are we're investing heavily in our hometown.
Well, you can read Devin's entire interview with Bill Ford on Flashpoint, on the Flashpoint page at clickondetroit.com. In the meantime, I want to thank all of my guests today, and thank you for joining us, everybody. And we want to wish those who are celebrating a happy Rosh Hashanah, and also we want to acknowledge those who are starting to observe the month of Muharram. Have a great Sunday. Thanks for watching Flashpoint.